I'm going to be philosophizing on what I've termed the virtues of abundance, and in particular, how these virtues are dynamical to sustaining positive psychological sustainability regarding ourselves and regarding goods as well as necessities, and this thingness that surrounds our existence in relation to the synthesis of existence and the continuity of our own existences that we tend to be predominantly concerned with, and in which tends to be what energizes us as well as directs our consciousness, or our consciousness tends to be drawn into the goods and necessities that we need to be able to sustain our psychological minds and our existences, and to engage meaningfully with our existences in various ways, often through our appetites and states as well as patterns of consumption that require us to engage our volitional minds in meaningful ways that expand our knowledge and the depth of knowledge, as well as the meaningful resources and sourcing of these resources and sources of goods and necessities that provide reliable sources of self-knowledge and knowing, as well as meaning that sustains us as individuals. And not just sustains us, it tends to regulate also the ill qualities of our experience, the the negative qualities of experience, and even states of embodying in which we might become uh, caught up in these perfectionisms or attachments, in which we can create space once we have a sense of what's good enough and a sense of abundance that we've created for ourselves, that's gratifying our ego and satisfying for the self, and also tends to be what gives us a crave for what's not just needed or necessary, but what's possible, and to open up these possible possibilities through our direct consumptions, and consumptions particularly of a meaningful kind and a meaningful nature and category of representation, in which we develop these depths of knowledge and cultivate greater sense of self-virtue and strengthening in the direction of our enterprising that generates a sense of an abundance along with the goods and necessities that we obtain through our working efforts and our volitional laborings, in particular engaging our volitional minds in ways that, it taxes us. It requires us to metabolize resources and exert energy as well as effort and time, as well as our own uh, direct participation through our volitional conscience in the meaningful work that we do and the world, and engaging directly in the world that creates and synthesizes value and meaning and worthwhileness through our contact and relation with the subjective object of relations to the thingness that surrounds us, involving these material and immaterial substances in which we are all composed of, in the goods and necessities, as well as the surrounding thingness around us in which we operate in. And we want to not just sustain ourselves, but we tend to want to sustain our local surrounding proximity to our corporeal or real existence that involves these material relationships and these physical relationships that are ultimately regulated, optimized, and sustained through the acquisition and generation of goods and values, as well as necessities in relation to these goods and values, and good conscience as well as knowledge, that are all important and essential for living meaningful, fulfilling lives through the direct processes and structures and syntheses of synthesis, and the synthesis of our existence, and which is intrinsic to the nature of consciousness and our very existence as a volitional mind that cognates and metabolizes meanings as well as knowledge in more of these intentful, purposeful directions. And it's often through our intent and purposings that we discover what is meaningful to our interests and engaging our interests, and also expansive to the mind and our engagements in the world through often this absorption and willingness to dedicate volitionally our resources and selves in regards to our working mind, our conscious and unconscious psychological processor that is metabolizing and consuming various resources in order to paradoxically support this meaningless, meaningful existence in which we endeavor for more meaning and more meaningfulness, in particular, that's in relation to these virtues of abundance that provide these goods and necessities and good conscience, as well as knowledge and information in regarding how we can live more meaningful, positive, productive lives in terms of regulating the resources and thingness around us and understanding the nature of the thingness and these resources around us that ultimately supports the continuity of our existence, which we tend to be primarily concerned with the finitude of life and the potential temporality of that, or the continuity of it if we were, say, to live forever. And when we contemplate our existence in relation to the continuity of existence, we often crave, as well as think about or ideate on the nature of thingness in relation to goods and necessities, the sourcings, the resourcing, the knowledge and truth in relation to the acquisition and volitional efforts that are self-directed and enterprised on to be able to generate a wellspring of value that not just allows our own self as an existing mind and working volitional mind to prosper and benefit from, but through our own exemplification of complex and meaningful strengths of our character and strengthenings of our character and volitional efforts that end up providing these psychological truths in relation to the successful acquisition and obtainment, but also the generation of value and worth through our own working labors and goods and necessities that come from that. We tend to sustain civilization alongside that by modeling virtue and modeling good character and good conscience in relation to the creation of worth, goods, and necessities in society, but also innovations that come through our own innovativeness and distinctive characteristics that involve these individual differences that are unique to us and which directly relate to our interests and meaningful pursuits that have a pathway that begins ultimately with individual autonomy and our volition to engage meaningfully in the pursuit of generating abundance, as well as acquiring and sustaining abundance, and doing so in order to maintain positive well-being and regulate or diminish negativities associated with ill states of well-being and ill qualities of experience. These negative qualities in relation to the positive qualities that pertain particularly to our strengths and provide direct knowledge and meaning as sources of potential wisdom that allow us to lead more of these enlightening existences that are luminous through our enterprisings and engagements that create an abundance of goods and necessities more than what is good enough for the self, that allows us to be able to generate stuff like wealth and to allow the individuals around us to prosper alongside our own contributions once we have deemed that we have good enough, and we can also now provide for others through our own meaningful intents and interests in doing so, which tends to be more likely as we create greater amounts of abundance for ourselves in wealth, often through these synthetic processes that involve our psyche and our mind and body that's engaged in the world in these meaningful ways and pathways often of interest and masterfulness. So that's all I wanted to say for this video. I hope you enjoy. Bye.